One. Okay. Everyone, as you're aware, that NEP 2020 calls for a shift from an assessment system that is summative and which tests rote memorization skills to one that is more regular, formative, more competency based, and which promotes student learning development and test higher order thinking skills of the students, especially the critical thinking skills, analytical thinking skills, and even the conceptual clarity. So the board has also introduced special scheme of biannual board examination for the year 2021-22 to possibly mitigate the impact of the pandemic. The first term examination, as you all know, is MCQ based and will have competency based questions. As CBSE is conducting this MCQ based board examination for the first time, so the teachers have concerns. So this webinar is an attempt to address some of the prime concerns of our teachers, especially with regard to the development of good MCQs. I welcome you all in this webinar on the subject of social sciences in this webinar series on assessment. You will be able to post your questions or your concerns in the comment box, which will be addressed by our experts. So this webinar will exclusively focus on the development of valid, reliable, and fair MCQs mapped with stipulated learning outcomes, and we hope you will be able to gain much out of it. Today, we have with us Ms. Vinita Rikhi. She is head of the Department of Social Sciences and Humanities at ASN Public School, Delhi. She is also associated with CBSE in different projects. I welcome you, ma'am. Along with her, we have with us Ms. Mahashweta. She is a leading educational specialist at EI, and she is involved in the task of creation of assessment material in the subject of social sciences. I welcome you, ma'am. Also, we have with us is Dr. Anandita Tagore. She is also a lead educational specialist at EI and is involved in the task of development of material in learning and assessment. I welcome you, ma'am. To begin with, I invite our first expert, Ms. Vinita Rikhi. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, and hello everyone. Thank you, Raman ma'am, for this introduction, and my sincere gratitude to CBSE for giving me this opportunity to present my views on the assessment paradigms. As today's agenda is aligning with the NEP 2020, and that to be with the competency-based learning. So we are today going to discuss about what and why of the competency-based assessment, what makes a good questions, and what are the different types of MCQs, how to accommodate taxonomies in the question paper, various formats of MCQ in the form of fill in the blanks, match the following, chronology, and various inferential based questions. We also discuss about the significance of assertion and reasoning based questions with reference to case based questions also. At the end, we will just discuss about the do's and don'ts of the good MCQs, or you can call it as the best practices to create MCQs. So let's start our session with a good note. Now, and we all know that the new education policy calls for a shift towards the experiential and competency-based learning approach. It is to ensure proficiency in learning and to make children ready to deal with the real life situations. Now, here emphasis is given to make education multidisciplinary, joyful, and holistic. This needs to call for designing, and you can call it as the redesigning of the assessment tools, and that to be in a scientific manner. The new education policy, which is their main focus, uh, basically has assumed the need to move from the rote to competency based learning and to make it more focused on creative, constructive, and critical thinking capacities. Basically, we need to prepare students to meet the challenges of the 21st century, and that to be in a very, very proactive way. So, after extensive research, we have realized that assessment must shift from memorization to formative and competency based assessment. Learners must be equipped with the abilities to solve problems. We need to inspire creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication so that the students are ready to face the tomorrow's world. But here, question is, what are competencies? So, a competency is basically linked to the domains under which the performance can be assessed. We can call it as the knowledge, skill, and attitude. Attitude, you can call it as the attribute because it is the composite word of skills and behavior. When you call it according to performance dimension, the competencies are observable and demonstrable. Since competencies are observable, they are also measurable. So it has to be dealt in a way so that the criteria, evidence, and performance should be enhanced in a holistic way. Now, these three, which I just said earlier, criteria, evidence, and performance, these are related with subjective or objective evaluation. And this time, the CBSE has introduced the objective type of format, and that to be with the 60 questions. So, this also I know that there is a difference between the assessment and evaluation. Assessment for learning is formative in nature. Assessment of learning is summative in nature. And assessment as learning is reflective. We all belong to a teacher community and all are working on the same lines. As I earlier said, competencies have three major domains: knowledge, skill, and attitude. Knowledge is related with seeking information, processing that information, applying that information with certain skills. And for using these skills, you need apt attribute. When we say skills, then various skills and sub skills are interlinked, which is they're in a common approach like the thinking skills, problem solving skills, accommodative, assimilation, convergence thinking, divergence thinking, logical observation, affective, psychomotor, kinesthetic skills. So all these skills are somehow interlinked, and we have to just assess the performance of the children on the basis of these three. Now, when we just talk about the question paper, when we talk about the assessment paradigms, the basic question is, why do we ask questions? Basically, it influence how and what students study, opportunity to focus on what's really worth learning, can stimulate thinking and develop higher thinking level, which are included in the form of strategies and habits. It also distinguish mechanical learning from understanding level, that is the apparent learning and the real learning. So it identifies common misconceptions and error and provide feedback on what students are learning. Now, let us see what makes a good question or not a good question. So, qualities of good questions. A good question should test a skill or concept that is worth understanding, which could stimulate thinking. It should be age appropriate because when we frame paper, it should be according to the age level of the children. Like that is the reason we basically call it as the secondary level and the senior secondary level. So it should be age appropriate. So it should test what is intended to be tested, state what is expected in clear and unambiguous terms. One needs to use clear, concise, and age appropriate language and should be error free and based on the SMART goals or SMART perspectives. SMART means the specific and clear, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Now, when we talk about the good questions, somehow some questions are not good in nature. Now, let us see what are the two distinctive features which are related with the quality of the questions. So it should not check for unimportant or inconsequential details, and it should not be taken directly from the textbook exercises. As you all know that in the first term, we are going to have 60 MCQs of varied level. In class 9th and 10th, we are having 4 distinctive books of social science, that is comprised of history, geography, political science, and economics. Now, for framing MCQs, we have to keep in mind the weightage given in the CBSE document. Like for this term, we are having 10 marks for history, 10 marks for geography, 10 marks for political science, and 10 marks for economics. And we are having 60 questions. It means we have to frame 60 questions from these 4 units. We have to prepare a blueprint according to the Bloom's taxonomy, which is based on the knowledge, understanding, application, evaluation, high order thinking, skill based questions, as well as the creative question. This is the Bloom's taxonomy, and we are having the revised Bloom taxonomy also. And I know you all must have just seen the question paper, that is the sample question paper prescribed by the CBSE. So this time we have divided the question paper into, in 4 major parts. Section A is of simple questions. Section B is of complex questions. Section C is basically the case-based questions, and section D is the map skill-based question. As we all know that Bloom taxonomy is related with the various domains, and knowledge and understanding questions basically belongs to the low order thinking skill based questions, and rest of the domains are the part of high order thinking skill based question, and we call it as the HOTS. Now these domains need to be aligned with the learning outcomes so that the cognitive and the metacognitive level of the children should be enhanced. There are certain key concepts which one needs to see in the paper, that is the 4 sections, weightage of the chapters, questions, case-based questions, taxonomy, figure, diagram, picture, web, chart, and map. Now, we all must keep in mind that when we give this kind of question based on the figure, diagram, picture, web, chart, or map, we have to provide an alternative question for the visually impaired candidates. Now, when we when we just discuss about the taxonomy, then it is related with the lots and hots. Like I earlier said, low order thinking skill based question and high order thinking skill based question based on the knowledge, understanding, application, analysis, and creativity. Now, let us take few examples from the SQP of this year itself. Now, this question, which is there on the screen, who amongst the following was the founder of Young Europe, the underground secret society in Bern? We all know that this question belongs to the low order domain. You can call it as the remembering. But why do we call it as the remembering? Why it is there in the low order domain? This is very, very simple because it is related directly with the knowledge, and we are asking the simple information in this question. So that is the reason it is simple remembering based question. Next question. Why is the power shared amongst the different organs of the government called as the horizontal distribution of power? Identify the correct reasons. Now, this is the reason-based question, and one needs to integrate knowledge with understanding. So it means the second process is involved in this question. So that is why it is again related with the low order, but it is the understanding domain question. It is related with the ability to grasp that information, and it is based on the interpretation. Next question. Observe this web chart and observe this web chart and find out the major factor which affects the setting up of industries from the following option. Now, in this question, we have given a web chat. We have just converted the information which is given in the book in a web way, in a tabular way. Now, this question is given in the web form, and students are supposed to think the aspects of manufacturing industry. So this is the application question, and students are supposed to use this information in situations. So it is now next question. This is analytical question, and this is related with the cartoon caricature. Now, which one of the following options best signifies this cartoon? And four distinctive options are given, and these options are quite interrelated. And this context of cartoon is very, very important for the understanding level, for the analytical level, because most of the time cartoons are attached to a context and the concepts. So you need to check, does the cartoon support or oppose the concept? Does it focus on the past, present, or future? And which aspect of the context does it relate to? So here you have to analyze and apply the information to the context. Next question is again analytical in nature, and this is also taken from the last year's SQP. So Rita has taken a loan of rupees 7 lakhs from the bank to purchase a car. The annual interest rate of the loan is 14.5%, and the loan is to be repaid in 3 years in monthly installments. The bank retained the papers of the new car as collateral, which will be returned to Rita only when she repays the entire loan. Now, can you analyze, can you guess in which domain this question falls in? Yes, this is the analytical question, because we are just breaking down into various constituent elements, and we basically perceive the relationship between the different elements, and the hierarchy of ideas are there. And you need to see this type of question in quantitative and qualitative basis. So different ideas, different procedures, all these things are quite interrelated. Next example. Arrange Thank you. Arrange the following in a correct sequence. Now, four distinctive aspects of the sequence are given over here. That is the transporting cloth to the workshop, sale in shops and showrooms, spinning the yarn, weaving of the fabric options. Now, here you see various stages are given, and one needs to analyze it in the correct sequence. So this is also the analytical question. Next question is, thank you. Next question is the evaluative question, because this type of questions are quite, lot in discussion, because it is the assertion and reason based question. So two statements are given in the question below as assertion and reasoning. Read the statement and choose the appropriate option. Assertion. Crude oil reserves in the entire world are depleting. We need to find a sustainable substitute for it. Reason is oil and petrol prices are increasing day by day, and four distinctive options are given, like both A and R are true, and R is the correct explanation of A. Second option says both A and R are true, but R is not the correct explanation of A. C says A is true, but R is false. And fourth point is, means the fourth option is A is false, but R is true. Now, this type of reasoning questions consist of two statements. An assertion, which is basically the statement of fact, and a reason, which is explanation for the assertion. You have to determine whether each statement is correct. If both the statements are correct, you have to determine whether the reason supports the assertion or not. Next question. Thank you. Next type of question is source-based question. Now, CBSE has this time just called it as the case-based question. This is the question taken from the history unit of class 10th, and this case study we have taken directly from chapter number 1. And the basic title of this case study is The Grimm's Tale. I give you a minute to read this case study, and then we will just discuss the various questions related with the case study. Let's come to the questions. Why did the Grimm Grimm brothers, yeah, why did the Grimm brothers gives the tales as a readable just a second, some issue. Yes, why did the Grimm brothers give the tales of a readable form without changing their folkloric character? Second question is, the impact of literary contribution of Grimm brothers was widespread. Identify the best suitable option depicting the same from the following. Now, if you have just read the passage, you will be knowing that no direct question has been taken from the source, and children are supposed to infer the answer from the case itself. It is in reference to the context, and look how various elements of competencies have been taken in framing these questions. The case study basically, you can call it as the case-based questions, can be the highest scoring part of the paper if attempted with an attentive and alert mind. So these questions are generally application-based and are related to the concept provided in the textbook. You all must be thinking that why we have just taken this case-based type of questions, and such case-based questions are similar to the comprehension questions which are there in the language part, which are there in the Hindi and English languages. So case-based questions are usually from a case or source or from any complete extract or a particular context from the curriculum itself. And but here the skills are absolutely different from the language, because here we are analyzing and applying that knowledge, and you can just see we are not assessing the language skills over here. All the questions are in reference to the context. So students are expected to analyze specific questions. In many cases, the scenario or the case study involves a number of issues. A case study encompasses a problem that is contextualized around the application of an in-depth analysis or interpretation. Now, basic question comes, how to construct these case-based questions. Before just constructing, before just going through the case-based question, we have to keep in mind the blueprint and keep the learning outcomes in mind. What skills and knowledge are you asking for? Make sure there is the sufficient information on the content and the context of the case. Question needs to be question needs to assess the interpretation and the application of the knowledge, comprehension skills, and the critical thinking skills. We need to relate the questions directly to the cases, and for that you need to devise clear and unambiguous questions. Make sure that the intended correct outcomes are completely correct. And you need to check certain things for developing these case-based questions, as well as the selection of the cases in the textbook. Why are you choosing a case study or a scenario format? You have to just keep in mind this thing before framing the question or before selecting the cases for the case-based questions. And secondly, you have to just align it with the learning outcomes. You have to think, will it help to develop knowledge of the concepts, ideas, and theory? And what questions or areas do you want the learners to focus on? So these are the fundamental things. These are the essential things which we have to see, which we have to cater before framing the question, because blueprint is a very, very important aspect of the question paper. Either the MCQs or means either the objective type of questions or the subjective type of questions, because we have to cater to the distinctive units. We have to accommodate all the taxonomies, and we have to just prepare a question paper which is comprehensive in nature. So these are the various aspects we have to keep in mind while framing the question paper. Over to you, Anandita.
Thank you, ma'am. I was wondering, thank you so much that you shared with us in such detail about the different competency questions. But often, ma'am, with case-based questions, and this one was from a history textbook, a challenge that teachers face while making case-based question is that we end up testing a language skill. Like, so how do we avoid that that we don't make a question which is a comprehension, like a reading comprehension question na ho jaye pura sawal, case based question?
Anandita, I just said कि जब भी हम ये क्वेश्चन पेपर बनाते हैं तो हम इस बात का ध्यान रखते हैं कि वो जो केस बेस्ड क्वेश्चन है वो लैंग्वेज स्किल्स में ना जाए, लैंग्वेज के बेसिस पे ना जाए, क्योंकि वी बेसिकली सिलेक्ट वन पर्टिकुलर कंटेक्स्ट, or you can call it as a concept, and then we put that concept for the analysis and for the application of the knowledge. So here the situation is absolutely different. We basically do not ask questions with related to the language, because this is the social sciences, it is empirical in nature. So when we say sciences, it means we have to put all the domains, whether it is the analysis or the application or the high order thinking skill based question, because it is related with creative and the synthesis also. So in-depth analysis as well as the interpretation is required for just selection of the case-based question, then the preparing of the questions from the case-based question, and even for answering it.
Got it, got it. I want to just quickly inform teachers that we have prepared a poll. The link of the poll is in the YouTube description area. And this poll is basically to find out what are the real or what are the actual concerns of the teacher, as in which are the issue that they get most, they find it more difficult to deal with. And the teachers can submit the answers to the poll anytime in terms when the webinar is going on. Now that we have gone through the different types of competency-based question, let's find out about what are the different kinds of MCQ, like what should a good MCQ include and what to avoid in an MCQ. I would request Mahashweta to take us through all these. Mahashweta, over to you.
Thanks, Anandita. And thank you, Vinita ma'am, for taking us through the sample question paper and explaining in detail each of the domains of the Bloom's taxonomy and how they have been covered in the sample question paper. We will now move to the second part of the webinar, which is about creating good quality multiple choice questions and the best practices for creating such questions. Before we do that, let us look at the anatomy of a multiple choice question. Let's see the terminology for multiple choice questions in the assessment industry. We see the first sentence is the lead-in. There is a stimulus. The stimulus can be any material, a text, map, graphics, a cartoon, a chart, etc., on which the STEM is based. And some people refer to the part containing the lead-in, the stimulus, as well as the STEM, that is the main question, as the STEM itself. Then we have the correct answer and the rest of the three options, which can be called distractors or wrong options. Some people also call them foils, incorrect responses, or inferior alternatives. The advantages of having multiple choice questions in our paper is that they can be used to capture misconceptions that students harbor. They can be used to test skills of all levels, as we saw, from remembering to analysis and evaluation. Everything can be tested through multiple choice questions. They can provide a better coverage of content than essay type questions and thus broadening the scope of the test. They can be used for in-depth analysis. Some of the disadvantages of multiple choice questions is that it's challenging to write higher level questions. And they do not actually reveal what students are thinking in the same way that a free response question would do. Because in a free response question, we're actually reading what the students have written by themselves in the paper. In an MCQ, they're choosing an answer, and we might not always be able to tell why they have chosen a particular option. They can also be time consuming to construct a good question with good distractors. The thought that goes into creating good quality distractors, it can be time consuming to create MCQs. Let's understand the various forms of MCQs that we can have in our paper. There is the simple form, which is a single response format. A simple question is given, the options are words or phrases, and there isn't a lot of cognitive load for the students in answering the question because the format is simple. These are two examples of multiple choice questions in simple format, and I'll just pause for a few seconds for you to go through them. We can also have multiple choice questions in a slightly complex format. The first example is a multiple choice question, which is asking for multiple responses. Let's read it. Economics is the science which studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means which have alternate uses. Which of the following can definitely be deduced from the definition? Human wants can be controlled, resources are limited. To use scarce resources is a problem of choice. P, Q, and R, three statements are given, and students have to evaluate each and every statement and see whether it can be deduced from the definition that is given. And based on that, they have to choose one of the given options, P, Q, and R, Q and R, P and Q, or only R. So in a way, even though we only have 4 options, it is asking for multiple responses. The second question over here is based on a table. Which row correctly describes what can be said about the conditions in the Sundarban Delta? The correct answer here is row P, and students have to look at each and every row and the various columns and the parameters that are given over here about the condition in the Sundarban Delta and see whether they are correct or not. We come to an assertion and reasoning question. Let's read the question first. There are 2 statements given below, marked as assertion A and reason R. Read the statements and choose the correct answer. Assertion: raw materials and intermediate goods are not included in the calculation of total production in the country. Students will have to read this statement and figure out whether it is true or false. Reason R: raw materials and intermediate goods have no value until they are converted into finished goods. Here too, students will have to read the statement, evaluate whether it is true or false. If A and R are both true, then a further step for students is to evaluate whether R is explaining A or not. Understand the causal relationship between A and R. Assertion and reasoning questions are evaluative questions, and they are a good way of testing high order thinking skills, and hence a good substitute for the simple MCQs or short response questions that we can have in our paper. Students have to evaluate both the statements, and the first one is a fact or a claim or an assertion, and the other is presented as the reason. They have to evaluate the veracity of the statements and the level of support by R for A. The 4 options should be from the available 5 options, 4 of which are given over here. Both A and R are true, and R is the correct explanation of A. Both A and R are true, but R is not the correct explanation of A. A is true, but R is false. A is false, but R is true. The fifth option can be that both A and R are false. However, this option should be avoided when creating such questions because it is neither helping us gain insights and nor helping children in learning anything because we're giving them both the statements as incorrect information. Then we have case-based questions. Ma'am has already covered the details of case-based questions and how to create such case-based questions. One of the important things when you are choosing the text for your case-based questions is to ensure that it is related to the concepts that are presented in the chapter. That using that case, you can test for the concepts that are there in the chapter, but not necessarily reading comprehension as ma'am answered the question. I will just pause for a minute for you to go through these questions. This is a case from the economics textbook. It is from the chapter Money and Credit. It is about the Grameen Bank. So if credit can be made available to the poor people on terms and conditions that are appropriate and reasonable, these millions of small people with their millions of small pursuits can add up to create the biggest development wonder. We see that there are words used in this statement on which have been elaborated on in the chapter, like credit, terms of credit, terms and conditions that are appropriate and reasonable. So there's also a distinguishing that can be done between the formal sector credit and the informal sector credit, how the terms and conditions in the informal sector credit may not be reasonable for poor people. And hence, through this, we can ask questions as some of these question examples you can see. Based on the information given above, which of the following must be true about the loans provided by the Grameen Bank? We have read that it says it gives credit to poor people on terms and conditions that are appropriate and reasonable. So they are small loans with reasonable interest rates. That is the correct answer, option C. Contrasting the above information with the credit situation in rural India, which credit source meets most of the credit needs of the rural poor in the country? The correct answer is many lenders, money lenders. Ahead. Let's look at some best practices that we can have when we're creating an MCQ. The first and the foremost thing is avoid testing trivial information. The concept that you're testing should be important. It should be relevant. It should be suitable to the overall learning outcomes of the chapter. Accurate, focused, and clear. This is, I'll just pause for a minute for you to go through this question. Here we are asking if a nationalist historian of India were to refer to the 1857 event of Indian history, what will they most likely call it? And the answer is that it's the first war of independence. However, this is for a grade 10, this is a very minor, trivial thing to test. This is a non-example of testing for important concepts from the chapter. Then we come to the context. We want the context to give sufficient information, but at the same time, not elaborate unnecessarily and increase the reading load. What you see here is versions of the same question. In the first version, the question is very simple. What changes took place in Awadh after the Battle of Buxar in 1974? The second version has a lot of unnecessary and irrelevant information that may not be required for students to answer the question. The Battle of Buxar was fought on 22nd, 23rd October 1764 between the forces under the command of the British East India Company led by Hector Munro and the combined armies of Mir Kazim, Nawaz of Bengal. The Battle of Buxar is regarded as the beginning of the British colonial oppression in India. What changes took place in Awadh after the Battle of Buxar? But if we're expecting students to know what changes took place in Awadh after the Battle of Buxar, we also expect them to know all of this background information about what the Battle of Buxar was. So all of this is unnecessary information, and it just increases the reading load for the students. For the content of the question, use simple language, active voice, simple tense, and very simple vocabulary. It's best to use vocabulary that is at least one grade lower than the grade for which we're testing. Here's an assertion-based assertion and reasoning question. I want you to focus on the A statement in this. Many private fintech firms have started in India that help individuals in mobile payments, insurance, stock trading, etc. Fintech over here is certainly not a familiar word for students of grade 10. What we have done over here is given financial technology, which is the full form of fintech in the brackets, to ensure that for those students who may not be familiar with fintech also can see financial technology and understand broadly what the statement is about. We don't want that students who are who have an understanding of these concepts and who will actually be able to give the correct answer are not able to answer the question because the language used in the question is higher, and we're not testing language skills or vocabulary of students over here. That's why it's very, very important to use simple language that students can understand, so that language doesn't act as a barrier in what we're trying to test. No bias and stereotyping of any kind. This is a free response question. However, I want you to go through it and just try to identify what the stereotyping is. It says domestic or household services performed by a woman may not be considered as an economic activity. Defend or refute the given statement with a valid reason. What the question is actually trying to test is that domestic and household services are not considered as an economic activity. Whether or not they should be considered, that's another debate altogether, but they are not considered as an economic activity and they're not included in the national income accounting. It is quite unnecessary to write performed by a woman, because it's not as if the domestic or household services performed by a man would be considered as an economic activity, right? The purpose of the question is about domestic and household services, and it's kind of strengthening that stereotype that we have that domestic and household work is done by a woman. So we want to avoid such biases and stereotyping in our questions. Use what and which appropriately and consistently. What is to be used when there is only one correct answer inside and outside the question. What is common between primitive subsistence farming and intensive subsistence farming. Which is to be used when there can be answers outside the given option. So we're asking them which of the following, which of the given options that we have is the answer. So which category of land use will increase due to soil erosion? Here, if we use what, that would be incorrect. What category of land use will increase due to soil erosion would be incorrect. Second, do not use personal pronouns in the stem. In a multiple choice question, there is only one correct answer. But when we use personal pronouns like in your opinion or why do you think Mahatma Gandhi took up the Khilafat issue, then essentially all of the options can be correct, right? Because in opinions or in something that a student is thinking, there is no right or wrong. But since there is objectively only one correct answer, it is a fact. So we want to avoid personal pronouns like why do you think or what is your opinion about this. The same question over here can be framed as why did Mahatma Gandhi take up the Khilafat issue? Best and most for higher order thinking skills high order thinking skills can be asked by using best and most. Let's take a look at both of these questions. Everything would come to an end if the legislative, executive, and judicial powers of the government were to be exercised by the same person or authority. Which of the following is the best explanation of this quote? Option A, all work in a country will stop in the absence of power sharing. B, separation of powers is needed to strengthen democracy. C, people cannot exist in a nation if powers are not divided. D, governments can function only if powers are distributed. Here, there are other options which kind of seem like they can explain the code that is given, but we're using the term best. So students can actually they'll have to actually look at all of the options and then figure out that which of them best describes and which of them is the best explanation of this. And that is why through best and most, we're testing high order thinking skills. Let's look at another example. In the 1920s, Arun worked in an industry governed by a law that did not allow him to move in and out of the workplace without the permission of his employer. Which of the following places did Arun most likely work at? Here, most likely is being used because it's possible, it is likely that Arun might have worked in the other places, but based on the information that students have about the mills and the plantation rebellions and all of the protests that happened in the 1920s. Students have to then see this information that they have about Arun, with the information that they have from the textbook, and figure out that based on this, it is most likely that Arun worked in the textile mills in Gujarat in the 1920s. Head. We use closed stems. Why is it important to have questions in the closed format, beginning with a question word? Because there have been instances where children can write the answer in the blank. We want to lead them to choose the correct answer. So if we're using questions in the first format, which is a fill in the blank type of format, then it should be followed with an instruction, like choose the correct option that can be used to fill in the blank. And if possible, we should also avoid using such format and make it a closed stem. The same thing, like in a developed country will have most people employed in the dash sectors. The same thing can be asked using almost the same number of words in this way. In which sectors will most people be employed in a developed country? Avoid negative phrasing. Negative worded questions add to the cognitive load. So unless testing for a valid student error or misconceptions, it should be avoided. And if we're using negative testing, then negative phrasing, then we highlight the word, the negative word, so that students don't miss it. I remember answering a lot of questions incorrectly back in school because I just didn't read the word false or didn't read the word not. So highlighting the word helps us ensure that students don't miss it. A paper as a whole should not have more than 2 or 3 negatively phrased questions, and these should be avoided for lower grades completely. If this example is a proper use of the negative stem, the first one. The tertiary sector has many reasons for its growth, so it requires understanding to figure out which of the given options is not a reason. Double negatives are to be completely avoided. There are questions which use more than 2 negative phrases and they're kind of made in order to trick students. But we want to test students' knowledge and not their cleverness in understanding the question. For this, let's take a look at this question which uses a double negative. This is something that we should avoid. The Grameen Bank provides collateral-free loans, its only requirement being that the borrowers belong to a 5 or more member group. Which of the following features of these groups cannot play a role in ensuring repayment for the bank? Let's look at the correct answer, which is option B. The bank does not lend to a group in which a member has defaulted. Not and not is being repeated in the correct answer. It can be quite confusing to answer such questions, and the same question can be reworded or modified in a way that you test the same thing, but avoid using negatives and certainly double negatives. I'll just pause for you to go through the question and before we move to the next slide. The correct answer should be accurate. There should be only one correct answer. It should be unambiguously correct. This is a version of the previous question that we saw, and this is also a non-example of this is something that we should avoid. The Grameen Bank provides collateral-free loans, its only requirement being that the borrowers belong to a 5 or more member group. Which of the following statements explains how this requirement ensures repayment for the bank? Now, what information do students have? They have that little case study passage that was there, which is on Grameen Bank, and they have the information that is given in the chapter Money and Credit. Option A, the group binds the borrowing member with a vow to repay the loan. Option B, which is the marked correct answer over here, the bank does not lend to a group in which a member has defaulted. The group uses the borrowed money in financing rural development activities. The bank can disallow any entrepreneurial ventures of the group in the case of non-repayment. With all of the information that is there in the textbook and the case study, we do not have enough information to be able to eliminate options A and D. So while they may be incorrect options, but based on the information that students have, they may be the correct options. So we should avoid using options that students cannot eliminate based on the information that they have. They should be unambiguously incorrect, and the correct answer should be the only correct answer. For the correct answer, we should not repeat words from the stem. Let's look at this question. Who were called chapmen? Bookseller, paper seller, workers of printing press, sellers of penny chap books. The correct answer is D, sellers of penny chap books. It has the repetition of the word chap from the stem. And so easily, even if students don't know what chapmen are, even if students have no idea of where this knowledge-based mechanical question is from, they can go for D. And we will not be getting accurate data about if say 90% students get the answer correct, we will not be able to say that 90% students actually knew this correct answer or they knew what chapmen are. So we should avoid repeating words from the stem. The correct answer should not stand out in any way. Let's look at this question to understand that point. Which of the following is an example of dependency of the primary sector on the tertiary sector? Options A, B, and D. Weavers made less money when the shops did not want to sell handloom products. The bank employees could not reach on time due to a transportation strike. And option D, farmers suffered a loss when there was not enough water to grow cotton. Right? These are all in past tense. But let's look at option C, which is the correct answer. Dairy and poultry producers suffer a loss when the shops go on strike. It is in present tense. The correct answer is in present tense, while all the other options are in past tense. But it should, which makes the option stand out. Sometimes these small things can implicitly make students go for an option that stands out. And if it is the correct answer, then again, we are not getting accurate information about students' understanding level. So the correct answer, and all of the options actually should be parallel in all dimensions, the length, the grammar, the idea. We should also not have options where one option is very, 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 very long and like it's like 10 sentence, 10 words in a sentence. And the rest of the options are like 3 or 4 words because that also makes an option stand out. So all the options should be parallel in all of these dimensions. Best practices for the wrong options, for designing distractors. Don't have absurd wrong options. Here, the grade appropriateness of the options is very important. Let's look at this example question, which is which does have some absurd wrong options. What is satyagraha? Answer is that it is a method of mass agitation. But let's see, a habit of always speaking the truth, a way to inflict pain on the adversary, a weapon that the Britishers developed against the Indians. Satyagraha is a word that we have heard so much, and even students have heard it so much and everywhere that options C and D become really absurd options for students and very easy to eliminate in that sense. So the working option for a child answering the question would just be options A and B. But again, our options should be grade appropriate. So here options C and D should be changed and modified in some way to make them grade appropriate for the level of a grade 10 student. Don't have overlapping options. Which of the following can best improve both farm and non-farm activities? A, access to the internet. B, cheap credit and nearby markets. C, HYV seeds and modern irrigation methods. D, better transportation and low interest loans. The correct answer is better transportation and low interest loans. But let's take a look at option B. Cheap credit. What is cheap credit if not low interest loans, right? And nearby markets. Nearby markets and better transportation are in effect have the same benefit to farmers, which is that both of them increase and ensure faster and quicker access to the market for the farmers. If the market is nearby, they'll be able to reach it quickly. If they have better transportation, they'll be able to reach the market quickly. Options B and D are overlapping in that sense. And that also here again, B ends up being a partially correct answer as well. So this question doesn't just have overlapping options, it also has two correct answers. These should be avoided because it increases the confusion in the question and can also make it ambiguous for students. Let's see why all of the above and none of the above are not useful options. They're not useful because they do not help in learning. Let's look at these four scenarios. In the first case, suppose all of the above is the correct answer. So if the students know that in the other three options, even two are correct, then all of the above automatically becomes correct, which makes the third choice non-functional. So though it affects the item quality in this way, sometimes all of the above being the correct answer can have a positive teaching element because the student is exposed to all correct information and no incorrect information. But still, we should avoid questions where all of the above are the correct answers. Let's look at the second case. Suppose all of the above is an incorrect option. Imagine the number of things that the student has to do. A and B are correct, but not C. A is correct, but not B and C, etc. There are like some 6 choices that the student will have to go through and eliminate to realize that all of the above is actually incorrect. This is very confusing of the student and the confusion can affect their performance. Let's look at the third case. Suppose that none of the above is the correct option. Here, the student is exposed to incorrect information in all the 3 choices. This does not help learning in any way. Suppose none of the above is an incorrect answer, which is the fourth case over here. Again, it gets confusing. The actual question for that option becomes, is none of the option incorrect? This question itself is so confusing and will therefore affect the student performance. It's good to avoid it to the best extent possible. Finally, these are some stylistic and editorial considerations for our paper and for the multiple choice questions we design. What can be the options order? Options that are taken from the stem or image or passage or table can be in order of appearance. If they are in the order of appearance that they in the order that they appear in the passage, it makes it easier for students. It helps in better reading of the options really. If they are words and phrases, then they can be in ascending or descending order of length. If they are years or time periods, they can be in a chronological order. Numbers can be ascending or descending order, or you can have your own flexible choice with it.
Great. Thank you so much, Mahashweta, for sharing this very important details about MCQ. Now, we've been getting a lot of responses and a lot of questions from teachers. So we would be right now looking at few questions that teachers have shared with us. And I'll be requesting both Mahashweta and Vinita ma'am to sort of respond to those questions. Ma'am, one of the questions that have been asked in the comment section is, when you were sharing about not to make questions on trivial information, Could you explain more about that? How do we decide what is trivial and what is not trivial? When teachers have asked this question, can you share more on that?
When we discuss about trivial and non-trivial questions, means the questions which are not desirable, the questions which are not in coherence with the text, which are incomplete sort of questions. So there are significant things like because whenever we just frame the paper, so we keep in mind the content that is based on the curriculum itself, and the type of questions we are framing should be based on the cognitive level as the metacognitive level. So when a distinctive type of question, you can call it as the unfair type of question or the meaningless type of question comes, then the content quality as well as the reasoning and thinking basis become, a little problematic for the children. So that is why we basically curtail those type of questions, and we give emphasis on the significant, content which is there in the textbook, which is desirable in the curriculum. So only those parts we basically cater.
Another question that was directed was, can case-based question be also given in primary classes to students of social science?
But one needs to just select the thing because this is the responsibility of the teacher, and as she's just preparing the question paper. So primary means it can be started from class 5 onwards, but not prior to that. From class 5 onwards, this case-based questions can be given, but we have to just keep in mind the age level of the children.
Shudha, you had
Age
shared
level
about
age level of the children, and secondly the type of questions the teacher is preparing. Like in the senior classes we basically prepare little inferential based question, like the things which are not given in the text, which are not given in the case. So
Yeah.
we basically ask students to infer that knowledge from the text because it is in reference. But in the primary classes we can just give easy type of questions, so to make them a little bit of practice to just grasp this thing. So this could be given but in a very simple form.
Yeah. May I also add something to that point? Just for lower grades, something that we try to keep in mind in the paper is the overall length of the paper. Just like in English and other uh, reading language subjects,
Yeah.
we try to keep shorter passages for lower grades, right? So those sort of considerations should be kept in mind when choosing a case for lower grades.
Coming to
Because
that itself.
it is related with the reading ability. We when we talk about the competency, we talk about knowledge and skills. Now reading, writing and comprehension is basically related with these two. So this could be given but in a very very simple form.
In fact, that is what the next question I was about to ask both of you. Is there a word limit to an MCQ?
Word limit.
Yes. One
Actually,
question has come.
yeah. When we just preparing the simple MCQ, because as we have just divided the entire paper into 4 segments, and section A is based on the simple question. So we basically gives the simple as well as a basic information type of questions in section A. But when it comes to the section B, which is complex in nature, which is related with the analysis, which is related with the application, in those questions we can give, but not so long, but in a simple language, and that to be in a single line. We can just prepare various dish practice as well as the right option.
I think word limit for a multiple choice question may not it's not necessary to have a word limit for a particular question. But like ma'am said, overall in the paper level, there should be a word limit for your paper, because how much can students read in the stipulated time that they have, right? So you should have a balance of like simple MCQs, or if there are longer MCQs, then it should be balanced out overall. I also just avoiding unnecessary words, unnecessary information. That's like a rule that should be followed. Even in options, we should avoid having options where the same word or same phrase is being repeated in every option. So something like this was done because something something, and this was done because is there in all of the options. So that is, even though the words are the same, it's still increasing the amount that the child has to read. So just avoiding redundant words in the MCQs is like a rule we should follow.
That is why I said meaningful, fair, cognitive, and the content
Yeah.
quality should be just kept in mind.
Absolutely correct.
Exactly.
One question that has come again is what are the ways we can make assertion and reasoning question? Constructing assertion and reasoning question is some, if there could be more insight that you guys could give, that would be really helpful.
When we talk about the assertion and reason, we basically give two type of statement. One is the assertion and second one is the reason. So reasoning questions basically related, assertion is somehow related with the statement of fact, and the reason is basically the explanation for the assertion. Now, you have to determine whether each statement is correct or it is, when we basically just discuss about the understanding part or the reason-based question. So it is up to the paper framer if they are just writing the appropriate reason for the assertion. Then you have to just see the various options given beneath. That is because we are having, whenever we just prepare the this assertion and reason based question, only four options are there. That is both A and R are true, and R is the correct explanation of A. And second is the both A and R are true, but R is not the correct explanation of A. So while framing the questions, you have to see, are you writing the correct reason of that assertion of that statement or not? So various analytical things you have to keep in mind while just framing this question. You have to determine each and every statement in a correct way. If both the statements are correct, then you have to determine whether the reason supports that assertion or not.
Shweta, you want to add something with regard to assertion and reasoning question making?
Yeah, just one thing, that when usually the A is simpler to decide, but which R to go with it will depend on what sort of an answer you want. So if you want, if your correct answer is that A is true but R is false, then you will go with an R that is in fact false. One thing to keep in mind is that A and R should at least look related. If they're two completely different statements talking about two completely different things, even though related to the same topic, but just like completely different, it becomes very easy to know that R can definitely not explain A. So now students just have to see whether both of them are correct or not.
It should be,
yeah.
it should be there in coherence.
Yeah.
The reason should be there in coherence with the assertion, actually.
Exactly. And paper overall, I think we should try to have a balance of what the correct answer for assertion and reasoning questions is. And based on what your answer is, you can go ahead with forming the ARs in that way.
Now, questions have also been asked about case-based, how to construct case-based questions. Is there any particular newspaper or a magazine or anything that teachers can use to practice case-based questions with students? That's a question that has come from teachers.
Yeah, in the history, we cannot take the things from the newspapers, but in political science and in economics, things can be taken, but we have to see the policy as well as the norms of the CBSE, because earlier they used to just describe that it should be from the curriculum itself, it should be there from the content itself. So for practicing these type of questions, the teacher can take such cases for the practice. But for preparing the examination, assessment, or evaluation, it should be from the content given in the curriculum itself. This is my belief, actually.
With regard to map questions are also something that is unique to social sciences. So anything that you guys would want to share about map questions, how to construct map question MCQs?
Actually, map question is based on the two distinctive level. First is the identification and second one is the location. So in the MCQ, we cannot give the location type of question, but the identification type of question can be given with, the proper options with the proper distractors. So identification based question can be given with the, reference to the map prescribed in the curriculum list, because we are having uh, if we just in economics, sorry, in geography, we are having so many chapters, 7 chapters are there, and in the terminal 1 we have taken only 4 chapters. So and in the history part, in the first terminal, we are having only 1 chapter, that is the nationalism in Europe, which is quite difficult to mark. So 1 marker question from this map skill is not there in the history part, but 2 marks question based on the identification is there from geography. So no location based question, only identification based question, and that to be from the geography of 2 marks.
Share something about map based question and how to construct map based MCQ?
Yeah, just like ma'am said, locating तो नहीं हो सकता है map MCQ format में, identification हो सकता है, and there can be ways of testing identification, like you can have a place marked on the map and given the clues, give some clues and have options to ask which place is this. Something that we have also seen is a map where, let's say, 4 places are marked, and you're asking which of these is marked correctly or incorrectly. So that way they actually have to see the location of each of the 4 places and figure out whether all of those 4 are marked correctly or not. There are various ways in which you can test identification of places marked. But yeah, I think locating places is a limitation of MCQs.
And I really want to add one more thing in it. Whenever we just give the map based, map skill based question, it is the dire necessity that we should give an alternative question for the visually impaired also. So, and that to be in a very simple way.
The sample question paper does have a map-based MCQ question, and teachers can consider that as a guiding point.
That's almost what we have as questions. I would just now quickly sort of summarize all the points that were shared by Vinita ma'am and Mahashweta. Just give me 1 second. All right, so in today's webinar, we covered the competency-based assessment, why we need competency-based assessments, what are the parts, what does a good question looks like, how do we use the Bloom's taxonomy in the sample question paper, what is the significance of case-based and source-based questions. We understood the different parts and anatomy of different types of MCQs, the significance of assertion and questions, and what were the best practices in creating MCQs. And I've just shortlisted the do's and don'ts. The do's, this is something that you should keep in mind when you are constructing an MCQ. Have very clear instructions. Test an important concept, a concept that is for the student to learn and which is important for them to remember, and not a trivial thing from the chapter. Test what it intended to test as a learning outcome. Have figures, have images whenever required to make it clear. As Vinita ma'am had just shared, that question has to be age appropriate in terms of content, in terms of language, ताकि बच्चे को कोई भी दिक्कत ना आए when they are looking at the question and trying to understand what needs to be answered. It should have correct grammar, punctuation, capitalization, and spelling. And most importantly, the distractors should not be created to confuse the kids, but to point out the wrong notions which they might have. At times, like, Satyagraha was a great example where there were two, option A and option B, which was similar to what Satyagraha is about. But this is where we need to be very, very cautious that we give distractors that do not confuse the kids. We give distractors that test the knowledge of the student. And of course, easy to read and interpret. A lack of language ability should not be a hindrance to answer the question. Don't use a word that may be difficult as a vocabulary. Not every student has the same level of vocabulary. So if we have a question that uses language in a way that is hard to interpret, then that often makes a difference in performance. And finally, the don'ts in what exactly we should avoid when we are making a good question and when we are making an option. So when we are making the options, the things that we should avoid is not to make a question which is, Mashura, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, it should not be a trick question, and there should be more than one, and there should not be more than one possible answer. And a good question should not confuse a kid, should be as clear as possible. And a good question should avoid unrealistic or contrived situation, double negative in the question or options, not or negative form questions unless critical. And a good question should avoid having things that distract kids, like unnecessary information. Even while you are framing options, you should keep in mind that options should not be overlapping, that two options should not mean the same. And the language should not be such that it stands out, that sare options, they are only of, let's say 10 or 8 words, and one option is going to, more than 15 words. Automatically, when one option comes across as completely distinct, then students end up eliminating it quickly. More options should not be contradicting, and that also helps students to eliminate the distractor. And it, like I said, it should not be too long, and unnecessarily it increases the difficulty of the student. So this was it from our side. I would request now Ramandeep ma'am to share her, to give the vote of thanks.
Before that, I just wanted to
Sure.
clarify one point that through the course of the presentation, we used a lot of examples. Some of these examples may not have been aligned with the grade 10 syllabus, or would be from the chapters that are out of syllabus. However, these examples are only for the purpose of explaining the best practices that we were looking at in the webinar. Yeah, over to you, Ramandeep ma'am.
Thank you, Shweta ma'am. I hope the participants have got many of their queries clarified during this webinar. And before we finally say off for this webinar, I would like to extend my gratitude to all the experts. To begin with, I thank you, Anandita ma'am, first of all, for wonderfully moderating and summarizing the session. And I thank the experts, Ms. Vinita Rekhi ma'am and Ms. Mahashweta, for providing insights on the preparation of good questions and even responding to the queries of the participants. I would also like to thank all our participants who have viewed the webinar, and I'm hoping that most of your queries have been resolved by our experts. But before signing off, I would request you all to provide your feedback given at the link in the description box. It's right at the end of the window if you see on the YouTube channel. Further, I would also like to thank the EI for coming forward and collaborating with CBSE for this program. In the end, I would like to thank the organizing team of CBSE, especially Pragya ma'am, Manish, Sudesh madam, Ravi Prakash ji, who have been working meticulously to make this webinar series a success. Thank you once again.